okay, thinking of the person that a narcissist would be drawn to, it's like the person who, might lack confidence, who wants to help at all costs. And, if there's a wounded, highly sensitive person who doesn't know, accept themselves, then they often will find their sense of value and security in helping someone else and doing more and doing more and doing more and trying to receive that love back, and can very easily be pulled into relationships like that for sure.
Dishonesty, disrespectful, discrimination, detached, dismissive. That's it. I'm done. Relationships can be messy. Are you having trouble with your personal or professional relationship? Not to worry. As a relationship therapist and coach for over 25 years, I have a lot to share, and so will my guest experts. Let's get smarter in our business and personal lives so we can be our best selves. Now, let's get on with the show. Welcome back to Mixing Business with Pleasure podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation today that I had with Alissa Boyer. She is a coach for highly sensitive people. If you've never heard of the term before, it's a real thing, HSP. And she has a great following on Instagram. So if you feel like you're a person who is highly sensitive, some people have called, or have dubbed the term empath, which I think is one and the same. And if you feel like you are that person, I think you're going to really enjoy the episode. But I also like to add the fact that, we are all sensitive people. We are all emotional. We were born that way. It's just that, some of us have it more, I think, than others. Like, we are more sensitive, and we get into perhaps one of the reasons this might be, or a few of the reasons why this might be. It like environmentally, it could be all sorts of reasons, but there is a genetic component to it as well, of course. We talk a lot about relationships and how, this can, hinder, but also help a relationship, and how two people that are completely different in terms of sensitivity can work very well together. But yeah, it really, it was very enlightening, and I think you're going to appreciate it. So dial in and enjoy the show. Alissa, why is it that some people are quote unquote more sensitive than others? What's your hypothesis behind that?
So what I have learned and experienced in my life is this term, the highly sensitive person. It was coined by Dr. Elaine Aron back in the early 1990s. And basically what she found through research was that, I think now they say about 20 to 30% of the population is more sensitive than others. So I learned, I always knew I was a sensitive person, but I didn't know there was a term for it until I was in my mid-20s. And in learning about this term, this trait called being a highly sensitive person, I learned that it's just natural for some of us in the world to be deeper feelers, be more impacted by, the stimulation around us, be more in tune with others. And so, at least in Dr. Elaine's research, she concludes that, we're born sensitive, but then of course, and there's kind of like a sliding scale as to how sensitive we are. Everyone's sensitive to an extent, but some people are much lower, and some of us are much higher on that scale. I also believe and have seen that life experiences, trauma, things like that can then make us more sensitive. And if you are naturally born a sensitive person, you're going to be more impacted by the things that happen to you in your life, making it more intense. So that's just kind of what I have observed and learned in my journey mentoring highly sensitive people.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because as a psychotherapist, I mean, this is my constant like question and challenge. And I mean, maybe there is no answer or we'll never know an answer, but like I just feel sure there's genetics. I mean, I'm one of 9 children in our family, and we're all very different. And some of us, I would say, are more sensitive than others. Um, but it's sort of like nature nurture, right? Like, is it how much is it actually like um nature, like genetics, and how much of it
Mhm.
is how our parents raised us during their life, right? Like, because my eldest or the eldest child would be raised very differently than when number 9 came along, for example, right? So the images of what that child saw and the words that they heard around them were very, very different. Um, so like I'm always kind of challenged with that, right? I mean, what's how did you come about like this idea that you are more sensitive? And let's say, how does that compare with your siblings, for example?
Mhm. Yeah. So my mom, this is really great that she did this. She kept a journal from the time she was pregnant until I was 5. And she did this for my brother and I. And so she kept, track of like just the way she felt and how we were at birth. And so I'm sensitive. My brother is not. Like he's just chill, just doesn't seem to be bothered. And so even from like the earliest of ages, I was a kid who struggled with sleep. I needed a lot of closeness. I needed a lot more attention. I was very emotional, very intense versus my brother, who is less sensitive. Like he slept right from the beginning. He was just not so bothered by things. And so my mom immediately was like, wow, there's such a difference between these two kids. And I'm a mom myself. I have a 2-year-old, and my husband's not sensitive, and I don't find my daughter to be very sensitive. But I have friends with kids the same age, and they're definitely like some of them are definitely highly sensitive, where we go to, they can't even go out sometimes because if there's too much noise around them, the kid is like freaking out and getting dysregulated, whereas my daughter is like thriving. So it's really interesting. Just to see like some of that, I guess, evidence like, hey, there's some people that just seem to be born this way. But of course, yeah, I mean, I've met people in my work where, I don't know how they were from birth, but I do know that they had parents who were emotionally unavailable or just, didn't treat them right. And so it made them hypervigilant. It made them kind of have to be on edge, like really observing people's, facial expressions and just kind of like hyper aware of what's going on. And to me, that seems like, wow, if they were a little sensitive at birth, it definitely was enhanced by their experience growing up. So I feel like it's kind of like hard to ever say for sure, but I have witnessed that there are like some of us who are just born to be like very aware of what's going on in the world and just very open and sensitive.
Yeah, no, those are really interesting observations. I really like the fact too that you sort of noted it in an indirect way that it's not necessarily gender specific, because at
Mm,
first you could have said, your mother's like, oh, here's my girl, and here's the tough little boy, but you
mhm.
have a girl who's kind of more like a tough little boy. It sounds like,
Yes.
yeah, just a little bit, yeah. So, and absolutely agree. Um, like this whole idea, as a relationship coach myself, the whole idea of men, um, you know, are not emotive or anything like that. I mean, that's just, crazy. Of course, they experience emotions and feelings, just like just like all of us. So again, nature, nurture, right? Like what was programmed out of them and what is truly um, still core to who they are. Um, I also very much agree with what you said about, and this is super important, I think, is about trauma and how that plays a huge role in our lives, in terms of becoming much more in tune with our emotions. I mean, it absolutely makes sense, right? I mean, if you experience a loss of somebody, um I mean that just gets you right, through the heart, sort of thing, right? Like to lose a loved one, for example. How can you not feel that emotion, even if you don't feel it in the same way that maybe someone else might? You see the other person suffering.
Yeah.
So it almost forces you to get more in tune with your body. Would you agree?
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's just like that natural response. And yeah. And I think a lot of people too, it's something that helped them survive in the moment too, where it's like if they had this traumatic experience, like just feeling like, wow, I really have to be aware of what's going on and feeling all of these things and noticing everything because if not I might miss a sign, I might miss something bad might happen. So yeah, it just makes sense why that would be kind of the natural response for people and then impact how they navigate the world as an adult and so on.
Right. Okay, where have where have you ever come across or felt that, or have you ever seen this, that they're the highly sensitive person, HSP, as they are known as,
Mhm.
the acronym, um, have you ever seen that this person has like suffered from it? Like, I mean, not just maybe, or this is not the right way to say it. How do you feel that they have maybe, like, what's the shadow side of that?
Mm.
Maybe that's a better question.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen so much suffering for highly sensitive people. In fact, I mean, the people who often come to me, I have people of all ages come to me. There's some people, in their 60s or 70s who are like, oh my gosh, I just discovered this. And the majority of them have suffered most of their life as a result of being highly sensitive. There's a connection to that. So something interesting I've observed and I experienced myself is a lot of HSPs will have like a chronic illness of some sort where whether it's digestive issues, that's what I had, or like chronic migraines, chronic pain, things like that. And at least, I can speak for myself and, some of the clients I've worked with, like I couldn't heal from my chronic digestive issues until I addressed the trauma that was stored in my body. And I was suppressing parts of myself because I had always grown up thinking that being sensitive was bad and was a problem and it made my life harder. And so I was like suppressing parts of myself. I had a lot of shame, and that's what I see for a lot of HSPs. And in addition to that, it's like we live in a society where most people are not highly sensitive, and sensitivity isn't necessarily something that's like celebrated. So you'll see a lot of people who are naturally sensitive and they're trying to hide that to keep up with the pace of their coworkers, right? Like that's what I used to do, where I was like burning myself out, working these long hours because I wanted to keep up with other people. I was getting yelled at in meetings and it was like destroying me inside, but I was like, well, I can't, if this breaks me, I'm not going to get the promotion. And it impacted me more deeply because I have such a sensitive nervous system. It was just like penetrating me and making me sick. And so, I see a lot of HSPs suffering in different ways as a result of that. And a lot of people, yeah, just don't accept themselves and they feel like something's wrong with them. And many of them heard that growing up, like you're too sensitive, you're too emotional. And so they just feel like their natural way of being is wrong. And it comes with then a lot of low self-worth. And that's a huge focus I have with HSPs is helping them accept themselves and become more self-confident, because I find that when you have that internal self-acceptance and high self-worth, you're more likely to advocate for yourself. You're more likely to not work long hours if your body is telling you you need to rest. And so it's like, it's so important, but a lot of people come to me just not even knowing how to do that. They don't even realize it's okay to accept themselves, which makes me super sad, and I'm so
Mhm.
passionate about helping them.
So you're saying that like your the suppression of your emotions manifested physically for you.
Without a doubt. It's crazy because I had these digestive issues that I could not get rid of. I would say it was like a span of like 3 years in my early 20s when I first moved to California. And I saw several gastroenterologists, and it was like one of those things where they're like, I don't know what's wrong with you. Eventually, I went to a holistic doctor, and he had me on, supplements and a specific diet, which helped. But I did not heal until we started doing the deeper emotional work and started to like kind of excavate the things that I was holding on to that I wasn't seeing. And it was once we did that I healed, and I still don't have issues today. And I was in such a bad place,
Yeah.
almost 10 years ago.
How
So
would
it's
you
crazy.
how like just in terms of the functional medicine background that I have, how would you describe your digestive issues?
I had SIBO, small
Yeah.
intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I
Yeah.
had leaky gut. I
Mm.
also had adrenal fatigue.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. And
Hmm.
stress plays a huge part in all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was horrible.
Okay. Yeah. No, it's yeah. None of those none of those are fun. What was the worst like adrenal fatigue? Do you know if you were at stage like 3 where I mean your cortisol is not even there anymore and you had absolutely no get up and go in the morning where you just want to lay in bed and you felt completely defeated? Was it that bad or
I wasn't at that point. I don't know what
okay.
stage it was at. I was still able to like get up and go, but I
Okay.
remember just feeling foggy and not having a lot of energy.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So how did you transform your I mean it sounded horrible like what you said in like it sounded like in the boardroom you were kind of
Hmm.
perhaps attacked in
Hmm.
some ways.
Hmm.
So, in terms of business, what this podcast sort of like I love to interview women in business and find out how they are able to make their purpose, become like a passion and sort of thing, and that they don't feel like they're burning both ends of the candle anymore. They're actually able to not only survive but thrive. So can you tell me a little bit about like how that was transformed for you?
Yeah, so the job that I was in where it was a very toxic environment, as soon as I was working with my holistic doctor, I gained more skills to regulate myself with, amidst the chaos of the workplace I was in. But it was a place where no matter how much I did to regulate myself, it was like I had to try so hard every day just to feel okay. And it was a really unhealthy environment. So eventually I applied for another job. I got a job at a great company, Vans, the shoe company. It
Hmm.
was amazing. Worked at their headquarters. Um, but I think I was working there for about 2 years, and I started just like feeling this pull to write. I was like so inspired by what I was learning with my holistic doctor. It was truly like changing my life. I was learning so much about myself and I've always loved to write. So I just started like writing in a Google Doc just for myself. And then I got this little intuitive hit that I couldn't ignore, which was to start a blog. I was like, what am I going to do with a blog? Like, no one wants, no one reads those anymore. I don't know. But I decided to start one anyway in January of 2019. And I was just writing just for fun. I just really wanted to help people and share what I learned. And so I did that. And eventually I noticed that anytime I talked about being a sensitive person, people really resonated with that. Would get messages and things like that. So I was like, wow, maybe I should just like talk more about this. And so it was really like a natural evolution where eventually by September of 2020, it actually, became a business. I started a membership for highly sensitive people. I, started offering one-on-one coaching, like all of this stuff just like naturally progressed. And then in August of 2022, I quit my full-time job. I had my daughter in May of that year, quit my full-time job, and now I've been doing this work full-time, which has been amazing. And something that was crazy was that it was as soon as I started blogging, like I I used to have kind of this low level of anxiety and it just went away. Like I was doing what I was actually meant to be doing, and it was, addictive in a sense because I was like, wow, this feels so good. So that really was like in a major support for me in just like thriving as a person in my life to have that real purpose.
I love that. Because I think, you know, especially when you spoke about how the anxiety lifted, because I feel that all of us, there's something about all of us, like things really click and you feel very aligned and in tune with your core values and your your own individualization and such when you are serving others. Like I 100% feel that everyone has a purpose in life and it's behind this idea of serving others, and it can be in all different forms, right? Like everything from a baker to a bus driver to customer support when your Wi-Fi is down, right? I mean, your hairdresser, like let's confess, women, like
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
if they if they go on mat leave or something like that, it's just like your whole world ends. So, I
Yes.
mean, I really like what you said about that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
no, no, yeah. So in when you said people started to respond to the blog, whenever you mentioned sensitive person, I have like I thought, did men also respond?
So not at first. Well, because
Okay.
it was like all so small. So it was like people I
Yeah.
went to high school with that I was like surprised
Mm,
by. But yes, eventually I did hear from men and still continue to do so. And what's really interesting is I have three different guy friends who are all highly sensitive that I met through my work in one way or another that I still keep in contact with. And it's really interesting because I mean, I think the research says that HSPs are 50% men, 50% women, but you
mm.
just don't hear about as many sensitive men because of their conditioning. But yeah, I did hear from men, and gosh, there is a need for support for them, like so,
Mm-hmm.
so much.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were like, wow, wait, does this apply to guys too? Because this is how I feel. And I'm like, yeah, it does. So, yes.
Well, I think that plays a huge role in, the stats on male suicide. And
Mm-hmm.
because I think obviously like they do really feel, and I don't think they have the support that they need out there to to have the courage really to come forth and just say, I'm that really hurt, or that's extremely hurtful to me. Because I think the fear kicks in, and when fear kicks in, it's so easy to have anger also come along for the ride, and that's where things just go amiss. Because if anger shows up, I mean, you can't communicate with anger. So yeah, I think, mothers need to respect that as well if they're seeing, their little guy. You have a boy, right? No, you
I
have a
have a
girl. You have a
girl.
girl. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, um, yeah. My problem is I have so many ideas coming in at once. But how about, did you mention neurodivergent or did I don't know. No, there's no,
I
is there any connection between neurodivergent or autism or ADHD or anything like that with HSP?
so I can't say for sure, like I don't know all of the research around it, but I will say that a lot of, not a lot, but a good amount of HSPs that I've worked with have found out that they have ADHD. So
Okay.
I have seen that. I personally do not. So I think there's overlap sometimes, but
Mm-hmm.
not always. And same with autism.
Mm-hmm.
I've had like I actually was working with a one-on-one client and she ended up getting a diagnosis for ADHD. She learned because she was always curious. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, yes, not
Mm-hmm.
always. I think it would probably be interesting to look into more because I would imagine there's some overlap, but yeah, I think it kind of just depends.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'd be interested in, well, I think there's some correlate. I can't.
Correlation,
Thank
maybe.
you. Yeah. Some days it's just not gonna come.
I get it.
Yeah. Okay, so who would you describe as your ideal client? I'm kind of interested to know like what some of the key studies were that, of you working with people, what you've seen.
So, my person that I often work with, they have a few key struggles that I see. A lot of it is people pleasing, where they are just suppressing their needs or completely disconnected from their needs and always putting other people first and never speaking up, never having an opinion. And this is causing them to really, they don't trust themselves, they don't feel confident. So that's a major thing that we address. Some of my clients, I mean, they usually kind of have all of the things, but a lot of like second guessing themselves, overthinking, like, oh, is this the right decision or is this the right decision? And then feeling kind of paralyzed and stuck. And again, I see it really related to a lack of self-trust, a lack of self-confidence. Um, and then the people who are major like overgivers, they overfunction in their relationships. They are always like bending over backwards for other people, but they are not always getting the same in return. And they are often like harboring resentment, feeling like unseen, and like there's a lack of balance in their relationships. So those are kind of the main themes that I see. And then it's really, I see it as like, okay, these were strategies you adopted, as a kid because you're trying to keep yourself safe and this was how you felt accepted and loved. And so we work to then help them build up their self-worth. And the other thing too, and this was my issue, is a lot of overachieving actually, where it's like, I want to keep up with other people. I want to impress other people to feel good enough. But then that's resulting a lot of times in burnout and just, not taking good care of themselves because they are like perfectionists, but pushing themselves past their limit. So that's another kind of archetype, I guess, that I see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense too. Because I was going to ask you, like, what's also like, would you say that HSP people tend to go into certain careers more than others? Have you noticed that, perhaps?
I've seen I've seen a lot of people in caretaking careers. Like I know a
Mhm.
lot of HSP nurses, a lot, or therapists as well. Um, a variety for sure, but that is like prominent. And then a lot of the people, especially in the medical field, are like burnt out or, if they don't have good boundaries with their clients, they're taking on, their problems and all of the things. So those are definitely prominent careers I see.
That's super interesting because yeah, the one client like as you speak that I've had now and I've had for a number of years, like, uh, inconsistently coming, like she's totally like, well, she's a nurse, but like, yeah, she just fits into this classification, I guess you could say, like to a T, to a
Mm.
T. So. The other question that comes to mind is how about relationships? How are
Mm.
these clients doing in their relationships that
Mm.
you work with?
A lot of there's a lot of different struggles that they seem to have. I would say one of the top struggles I see is not feeling seen, heard, accepted by their spouse because, a lot of HSPs may be in relationships with non-HSPs. That's the story for me. And so, I work with a lot of women. So if they're in a relationship with a man who's less sensitive, like just generalizing, but it is a lot of what I see, a huge like issue they'll run into is like they're feeling emotional about something. They got upset about something. Their spouse used a more harsh tone of voice and then they got their feelings hurt. And then their spouse is like, "What? Why are you making this a big deal? Why are you so sensitive?" So it's like this lack of understanding and not always receiving the acceptance and empathy that they crave, not always receiving the emotional depth in their relationships that they need. That's a huge one. Also, not having relationships, friendships where the HSP is giving so much, but not receiving the same, like over giving, always checking in with their friends, but not feeling the same back. That's a huge one. And also, something I see too is a struggle to find people they truly connect with. I do have people come to me who are like, I just haven't made a friend that I feel I can fully be myself with. There's some loneliness and feeling like there's no one else in the world who would understand them. So there's a variety of different things that I see for sure. Oh, and one other thing I'll say too is a lot of HSPs can get very defensive, take things personally, kind of get on edge, kind of like I've heard from clients say, like, oh, my family says they feel like they're walking on eggshells around me. So sometimes there's kind of a struggle to regulate themselves and they kind of can get into like defensive mode easily as well.
Man, that doesn't sound like a very great life. Like,
Oh,
like when you sum it up like that, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's extremely lonely.
mm-hmm.
You must feel so alone
Mm-hmm.
in your
Mm-hmm.
mind sometimes, in your heart.
Yes.
Um, and you also brought to mind like one couple that I was working with too, like years ago, but like she would also, as you describe this more and more, like she would also fit into that category. And also, she was married to an Italian man who, like you know how Italians speak, right? I mean, it's all kind of different loud tones. It's lots of hands in the air, a lot of, I think very direct in
Yeah.
many ways. And yeah, that wasn't going well either, with her,
Mm-hmm.
which makes me want to ask you, like, first of all, okay, so how would you manage, how would you help a couple through this? Like, do you just work with the individual person, or do you ever do some sort of couple counseling? And I'm asking that because I'm wondering, like, do the people that you work with feel like this is like, do they feel or you feel I need to have the other person understand you, or do you try to instill some responsibility in them to manage their own feelings?
So I just do individual, but a huge like thing that is important to me is bridging the gap between HSPs and non-HSPs and creating more understanding. So, one thing I've done is like I have a podcast episode that like non-highly sensitive partners, friends, whatever, can listen to understand their sensitive person in their life. I also have this guide where highly sensitive people can download it and either they can share it with the less sensitive person or they can just use it as a guide to have a conversation. Um, And so when I'm working with a highly sensitive person, yes, I am, helping them to a huge thing I see is they're not accepting themselves. And so they're kind of like trying to get the other person to accept them and over explaining, and it's like not productive. So I do help them to take responsibility for their side of the street. And also I give them, tools and ways that they can share about their sensitivity with their partner who might not understand it. So it's kind of like helping them bridge the gap, also help, equipping them with tools to explain it to their partner and also to, you know, learn like I think it's just like meeting each other where you're at because for me it's like my husband is not highly sensitive. He's an attorney. He's very direct, very bold. It's like we couldn't be more different. We are very different people. And a huge point of contention in our relationship for a long time was he would be direct, I'd get my feelings hurt. He was so logical. What's wrong? Didn't understand it. My dad's an engineer, my brother's an engineer. I'm surrounded by men who are very logical and I am emotional and sensitive. And so what we've learned, like with my husband, for instance, and this is what I teach my clients, is like, okay, I have an opportunity when he says something directly to kind of like take a beat and realize like, okay, this is how he speaks. Sometimes it's not personal, like I can check myself. But also my husband has learned over time through conversations to also know how to soften his tone. And, when I have something that I want to tell him about, like sometimes I don't need advice. And I just simply say, I just want to vent this to you. I don't need advice. I just want you to say, like, I hear you, stuff like that. So I've learned strategies to work with a different type of person. So that's kind of what I teach is like, how can we bridge the gap, meet each other where we're at, and have respect for each other, even if we don't personally understand the other person's experience.
Yeah, no, exactly. I feel no, as someone who works with couples, I like, what you're saying. It's like, yeah, I need to take responsibility for my emotions and how I display my emotions. And, maybe we can collaborate a little bit and collaborate, compromise. I mean, I I like the word collaborate better actually than compromise, even though the Gottmans often use this exercise called compromise. But when you think about compromise, it means both are giving up part of themselves in a sense, right?
Mm.
It's sort of like I'm compromising for you. And whereas collaboration, that's more like what we do in the boardroom, right? Like I'm not really crazy about your idea. I would love to take my idea, to the table, but let's see what we can do here. Let's see if we can both have, some sort of win in this or whatever that might be. So it's more of a discussion rather than sort of like a fawning,
Mm.
giving up of something. Um, so yeah, I think that's really good. Which again, bring it like and it's so interesting, like how I mean, that's the last person I thought you would marry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like what like that's super interesting. So, I mean, when did you meet him? And like what stage of your, highly sensitive person, identity were you at when you met him?
So yeah, I met him almost 9 years ago. And I was like, I forget if I knew I was a highly sensitive person or maybe I was just discovering it. I was brand new to it for sure, either way. But it's interesting because I know from the beginning that one of the things he liked about me was that I was like a gentle hearted person. Like in our wedding vows, he was like, "You have the softest soul of anyone I've ever met." So he had an appreciation for that part
Hmm.
of me, and I think that we were from the get-go for the most part. There's of course some, struggles, but for the most part, we're able to see our differences as complementary because his he's naturally very confident, says what he thinks direct. That was not me, but I grew in those areas because of him. And because I was emotional and sensitive, it helped him to be more empathetic to, the people he works with, and also like checking in on his friends that might be struggling. So we both learned things from each other, but it's also like it's one of the best parts of our relationship, but it's also the thing that can be the biggest struggle as well. So yeah, and I think it was kind of good that I was on that journey learning to accept those parts of myself. And I was pretty open about what I was learning, which I think helped because he was along for the ride with me as I discovered all of that about myself.
I love that. It's really
Yeah.
awesome. How long have you been married?
Um, Almost 4 years in October.
Okay. Um, and I also really appreciate what you said when you said, okay, first of all, he did love that about me. He does love that about me, and how he was able to take that into his own behaviors and like even to the workplace, right? Because and I mean, it makes so much sense. Like he needs to have conversations with his clients. And like, what type of law does he do?
Employment defense.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, like he needs to have empathy for the client. He
Hmm.
needs to be able to talk to colleagues in a way that, he's able to really connect with them. Yeah, it's a huge advantage that he has to have you as a partner to teach him those skills. I mean,
Hmm.
when you even think of it like doctors, I mean, if you could have the best educated doctor, but if that person doesn't have any sort of bedside manner,
Right.
it's useless. It's completely
Yes.
useless.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, and like a huge heart. I mean, even a surgeon, a person that you might not like be seeing twice a year or something like that, maybe a one-off. If that surgeon doesn't have extreme compassion for his work,
Hmm.
he can't do good work. So,
Absolutely.
so I just want, we're coming to the end here too, and I kind of hate to bring this up because it's a bit of a downer, but at the same time, I think it's really necessary to bring this up, especially when it comes to relationships. But would you say there's a high percentage of people that are highly sensitive that end up with a relationship that's, not the best, like especially in terms of narcissistic partners?
Yes. Yeah. There's definitely a big correlation with
Hmm.
empathetic, sensitive people and yeah, with narcissistic people for sure. I actually had written an article years ago for the website Highly Sensitive Refuge on that topic because it's just something that's big because it's like, okay, thinking of the person that a narcissist would be drawn to, it's like the person who, might lack confidence, who wants to help at all costs. And, if there's a wounded, highly sensitive person who doesn't know, accept themselves, then they often will find their sense of value and security in helping someone else and doing more and doing more and doing more and trying to receive that love back and can very easily be pulled into relationships like that for sure. Um, in my journey before I met my husband, like I wasn't in great relationships either. And I know it's a huge thing for many, many HSPs, unfortunately.
Yeah, gosh. I mean, and it's so sad because, of yeah, just because you have a tendency to be a helper or a healer, yeah, it shouldn't be a right to be taken advantage of. And
Exactly. And it's funny, I mean, interesting. Literally right before our conversation today, I shared a post on my Instagram about, you can be a gentle person, but you can also be someone who doesn't allow others to take advantage of you. You can be an empathetic person, but you can also have healthy boundaries, And I think it's like
exactly.
people when they don't have that self-worth and self-confidence, they are don't like respect themselves enough to have the boundary. They don't even know that it's an option. They are so hungry for love and attention sometimes that they will let others do whatever because it's like, well, that's what I deserve, or that's what I can get, or I always was told I was so difficult, so I guess this is the treatment that I deserve. So yeah, it's prevalent for sure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No kidding. It's so true. Like when I think of the nurse client I have too, like I think I do remember because as as a therapist, you sort of go back into the childhood a little bit, right? And I think she was also told, oh, you're just so, yeah, like difficult, or oh, like, I mean, I don't know, like everything from maybe, going into kindergarten and clinging on to a parent,
Mhm.
or yeah, like you just can't like compete the way that some other people can compete, or um yeah, I mean, no kidding. It's I'm sure you get the message often that you're causing trouble, or yeah, you're holding everybody up, or
Absolutely.
yeah. And as you said too, the inability to make a decision
Mhm.
is also so plaguing for these people, because heaven forbid they hurt somebody else's feelings, in the process. Um,
Yes. Well, and
and
the sad thing too is, and I've seen this a lot, is that a lot of sensitive people, are very empathetic. And so let's say they're in a relationship with a person who's had a lot of trauma, but that traumatized person like treats others poorly. That sensitive person might be like, well, I know they've gone through a lot, so it makes sense that they would act that way. And then, they become the punching bag because it's like, well, I know they've been through a lot, and they try to make themselves the savior while getting treated poorly in the midst of it. So that's like, yeah, it's just a thing that really, yeah, it's like they're magnetized to each other
yeah.
until that sensitive person knows, no, I don't deserve this. I know my worth and value. But until then, you're just so much more drawn to it naturally.
I mean, yeah, like I again, as you speak, I have a couple of clients coming up in my head again. One of them, a man, actually, right now that I'm working with, and it's so true. I always describe it as, like you're the person, like you're always after the wounded bird,
Mm-hmm.
and always giving that person a second chance as well. It's just yeah, the benefit of the doubt, well, next time. Or if a highly sensitive person is married to someone with an addiction, which is that's
Yes.
something else I've seen over and over, it's sort of like, well, they're trying to get over
Yes.
it, or whatever, like, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but they're not willing to step into a rehab. It's sort of like something needs to change. Like they can't do it on their own. And you being like a supporter and enabling, their addiction is not helping it at all either.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. A lot of codependency, things like
yes,
that for sure. Hmm.
exactly. Exactly. So, how, like, so what's a typical like coaching journey that you would have with a person? Like what off what do you offer someone?
Hmm. Yeah, so if I'm working one-on-one with someone, depending on the length of time, I like to just really focus on like one or two areas that we're going to like hyper fixate on. So, with one of my recent clients who I worked with just for a month, like she really second guessed herself a lot and did not know how to use her voice. And she had a family member who would always just like trample over her, just talked down to her. And my client was always like, well, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I did something wrong. And she was so scared of this family member. She would avoid them at all costs, but it was making my client just feel worse about herself, like she was just being walked all over. Um, And so in our work together, we worked on really helping her find her voice, like connect to how she actually felt, because she was so disconnected from what she actually wanted and how she felt, because she was always externally focused and looking at what other people needed or how they were reacting, that she's like, I don't even know how I feel about this. So we worked on that. We also worked on building her self-trust so that, if she felt a certain way, if she felt like this family member was being disrespectful or crossing a boundary, she could trust herself. And then, we worked on, okay, now let's try some strategies for speaking up. So, she would send me like a screenshot of her conversation with this person, and I would help her kind of craft responses that felt empowering to her. And it was huge. Like, and she even messaged me the other day and she's like, oh my gosh, I had this conversation with this person and I was freaking out, but I stood my ground and it was really uncomfortable. Because that's another huge focus in all of my work is helping highly sensitive people really expand their tolerance for discomfort, because it's like, okay, if you're going to speak up for yourself, it's going to be uncomfortable. Like everything new is going to be uncomfortable, but they're often like, oh, this feels bad. I don't want to do it. But I'm like, just because it feels uncomfortable doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's new. So it's like, learning how to be able to tolerate more of that so that they can take these steps that feel empowering to them and build that self-trust to know, oh, I have my own back and I can, you know, advocate for myself when needed rather than stay small and get walked all over.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, I think you summarized that really nicely too in terms of what coaching actually is, right? It's to have that person like that you can reach like consistently and sort of like you're not on speed dial, but like you're really cheering for this person as well, right?
Yes.
Like I mean, you're always thinking of this person. And
Hmm.
I mean, I have that too, that they have access to message me because
Yeah.
it's in those moments that they have to do something and they can be frozen and go
Yes.
back to the old behaviors again so easily when they don't have that constant support. Like, I mean, you can equate that to like a coach, like in the physical sense too, right? Like, I mean,
Mhm.
whether it's for weight loss or like your body or like physically, on the golf course, like, maybe a screenshot of, is this the right position or like whatever that is, and to get that feedback, or yeah, like to show the video and to present that to your coach or for him to critique it or whatever. Like it's just it's completely different from therapy is what I'm trying to say, and it's
Mhm.
it's sort of for this person that like has a real goal in mind, as you mentioned.
Yes.
um it's it's like no other, really. I think it's just it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So
I enjoy it so much. And the thing that I always love is every person I work with, I'm just like, I see so much good in them and I can reflect back to them, because I think we're all just so hard on ourselves. And I'm just like, I love every person I've worked with. I see their
mm,
special gifts, and even just for them to be seen and have that like genuinely reflected back, I know has power too. It's just like we all just want somebody to understand us and feel accepted. And so, yeah, I've found both therapy and coaching personally so supportive for me. So I'm like so honored anytime I get to be a part of someone's journey in some sense.
I know it's so true. Oh, it's so rewarding. So okay, well, I really appreciate, discussing this with you. I think it's super important, the work you're doing. Um, I know I had another question for you. Um, I just, I really like what you said about complimenting each other too. Like, even though you are with a partner that is completely different from you, that you do, like, he completes the other half of the circle, right?
Yeah,
Like that's what I see. Um, and and I'm sure he has helped you in your business.
majorly.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. Because we don't Otherwise, like a person like yourself would not have the confidence, and even myself too. Like I have a mentor for my business too, because it's like even to sell something as a therapist and a coach, it's sort of like, I don't want to put you out of,
Hmm.
it's sort of like financial, like,
Yeah.
it's just like you just don't want to hurt another person's feelings. And
Yes.
so it's really can be challenging sometimes, and you definitely need that support. So
For sure. Oh my
yeah.
gosh. Yeah. And it's so funny because I have, a mentor for my business as well. And something I've learned over the years is I really do appreciate someone who's direct. I really do appreciate someone who's going to tell it like it is. Like, please don't sugarcoat it for me because I'm
Yeah.
not going to grow if you just are trying to appease me. And it's been extremely helpful. So I think, yeah, just like being able to, yeah, find people that have the strengths that you might not have to help you kind of grow in different areas is huge. It's shaped me into the person I am today. Like I would not be here without my husband, without the support I've had along the way, without a doubt.
Wonderful. And lastly, I'm also going to mention too that I'm really glad you brought up that last client that was having a trouble with a family member, because that's so common.
Mhm.
It's like we talk about like intimate relationships, like with a partner, but there's collegial, like, that's another coaching client I had that was having problem, with a colleague. It's so prevalent. So who's ever listening out there, yeah, it definitely doesn't have to be like a certain type of relationship. It happens in all types of relationships. And
Sure.
it's, yeah. So thank you so much, Alyssa, for, the work that you're doing and meeting with me here today. I really appreciate it. And I think a lot of people are going to resonate with what you spoke about today. So is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we end?
No, I mean, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. I have so much fun talking about these topics and just getting curious. So, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, I guess just for anyone listening, if you might feel like, oh, wow, I am a highly sensitive person, like I encourage you to just dig into it because when you learn how to embrace this part of yourself, it's often the missing puzzle piece in your life. And it can make a lot of things make sense that didn't make sense before. So it's absolutely worth exploring.
Yeah, and you have tons of followers on your Instagram. I noticed. So I mean,
Mhm.
there's a reason for that. People are definitely benefiting from you, and then you have your own podcast as well, and we'll link all that up in the show notes. So there's lots of ways of connecting with you for sure.
Absolutely. Yes. Come check it all out.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, take care, and everyone else, we'll see you next week. Thanks, Alyssa.
Thank you.
Hey there, listeners. Do I have an offer for you? Whether you're a man or a woman feeling exhausted with the dating apps, this is for you. Introducing Divorcee, a powerful coaching program designed specifically for divorced men or those in loveless marriages who are ready for change. In just a short time, you'll develop the emotional intelligence that makes you irresistible to women. I'll personally guide you through every step, teaching you everything you need to know about fulfilling a woman's emotional needs. But here's the exciting part, which I'm like seriously so excited about. Your transformation will be shared in an upcoming episode. Women love a man who's open about his emotions, traumas, and growth. So embrace this opportunity to become the catch, the prize, the whole damn vibe. Ready to make a change? Click the link in the description or visit our Mixing Business with Pleasure webpage to join Divorcee. Now, let's dive in and make this happen. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Remember that you can watch the full episode on YouTube, where I plan to hang out the most. Your feedback and suggestions for future guests are incredibly valuable to me, so please don't hesitate to post a comment. You are an integral part of this journey.